Hello and welcome to On The Record. I'm your host Adam Jasa. My guest today is Władysław Bartoszewski, Deputy Foreign Minister of Poland and Member of Parliament for the ruling coalition. Last Sunday, the coalition suffered a major setback as opposition politician Karol Nawrocki won the tight presidential race against the government candidate. On the record, the government remains firmly in control of domestic and foreign policy. Off the record, there is widespread concern in Poland and abroad about the country's future direction and its support for Ukraine.
Karol Nawrocki, ogromne brawa!
The election of nationalist Karol Nawrocki as Poland's new president has raised concerns in Poland and abroad that the country's staunch support for Ukraine's war effort and its integration into Western structures may be at risk. Throughout his campaign, Nawrocki stressed his opposition to Ukraine's integration with the EU and NATO, making it contingent on Kiev's unequivocal atonement for atrocities committed against Poles by Ukrainian ultranationalists during World War II.
I do not see Ukraine in any structure, neither in the European Union nor in NATO, until such important civilizational issues for Poles are resolved. A country that cannot answer for a very brutal crime against 120,000 of its neighbors cannot be part of international alliances.
Although the Volhynia massacre issue has been a thorn in the bilateral relations for decades, Poland's main political parties pushed it to the sidelines after Russia's brutal aggression in 2022. Millions of Poles accepted Ukrainian refugees into their homes and made generous collections to support the war effort. Support for Ukraine was the single issue Nawrocki's backers in the Law and Justice Party and the incumbent President Andrzej Duda, also a Law and Justice stalwart, agreed with their arch-rivals from Prime Minister Donald Tusk's ruling coalition. Nawrocki shattered this consensus, adopting the hostility towards Ukraine of Poland's far-right confederation that has been pushing anti-Ukrainian narratives for years. This has prompted the outgoing President Duda to suggest Nawrocki will moderate his stance now.
I am certain that he will carefully consider the international situation and the situation in Ukraine and Polish-Ukrainian relations after he becomes the president.
The first diplomatic test for Nawrocki came immediately after the election, when Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky congratulated him and expressed hope for continued fruitful cooperation. Nawrocki's response was notably reserved. While he affirmed the importance of partnership with Ukraine, he stressed that it must be based on mutual respect and understanding, and again pointed to the need to resolve long overdue historical issues.
Minister Bartoszewski, thank you very much for accepting our invitation at such a busy time.
Thank you very much for inviting me. Time is never too busy to appear at TVP World.
You're so kind. Prime Minister Donald Tusk told the nation that the government will carry on with its domestic and international agenda following the presidential election. Yet we see that inside the coalition, many, including from your grouping, criticize him a bit for the outcome. So how do you see this?
The election was very tight. The result was very close. And what we discovered that over 20 million people voted, a very high turnout. Half of them voted for the new candidate, now the new president-elect. Mm-hmm. And the other half, 300-something thousand less people, mm-hmm. but over 10 million, mm-hmm. voted for the government. Mm-hmm. So the country is split between the government and the president. Mm-hmm. From the point of view of Polish constitution, it's the government and the prime minister who runs the country. This may escape some of our foreign viewers, but president of Poland doesn't have the prerogatives of president of the United States of America, and even less so than the president of France. Which is
so the bottom line is, does Prime Minister Tusk still have yours and your party's confidence?
We support the government of 4 coalition parties, and we do not see any reason to change that in a sense of the setup. The 4 parties supported candidate Rafał Trzaskowski in the election, and in the second round. and the candidate narrowly lost. But we were elected on the 15th of October 2023 to do something, and we're going to continue doing that for the next 2.5 years. Now, this doesn't mean that there shouldn't be any changes. The government should be faster. Reshuffle depends on the Prime Minister, but clearly there's some changes are needed, some adjustments within the ministry, division of power, the concentration of what we have to achieve, what we promised we need to deliver. Prime Minister himself during the final rally for our candidate said we haven't delivered everything that we promised, and that is something which we must change, otherwise.
So the bottom line is the Prime Minister stays.
I don't quite see how he could not be the Prime Minister.
Right. Okay, so let's move now to the impact of this election on the international situation. You mentioned the fact that it's government which is in charge, but at the same time we've heard Mr. Nawrocki being really skeptical about Ukraine's, let's say, EU aspirations, NATO aspirations, and it's in a sense departure from his own party. So to what extent this is going to influence things going forward?
Mr. Nawrocki ran the election not as a member of Law and Justice Party.
But everyone knows that he was the party's
candidate.
candidate.
President Duda was a peace candidate. This was supposedly civil society.
But you yourself said supposedly.
Yes, but there is less connection. And therefore there is a degree of unpredictability, because we could have roughly expected President Duda to do what he did, and here we don't quite know. Nevertheless, the president can only rule if he has a strong backing of his political milieu. Without it, he cannot function, because he doesn't have the apparatus, he doesn't have the staff to do that. So. And both the ruling coalition and the Law and Justice is adamant that the support for Ukraine is our raison d'etat. It's in our international interest, and I do not quite see that changing. As to membership in NATO, frankly speaking, it's not us who is a problem for Ukraine. A couple of other member states say, especially the United States of America, says Ukraine will not join NATO.
So in other words, it's moot anyway.
So for the time being, this is not a point of discussion. It was a point of discussion in 2008, where at the NATO summit in Bucharest, President George W. Bush Jr. said the NATO should bring Ukraine in, and Poland and the Baltic states enthusiastically accepted that, and then it was thwarted by France and Germany. So that was the situation. So, but Ukraine was supposed to.
The situation has changed since then, and only last year we heard from NATO Secretary General, the previous one and the new one, saying it's just a matter of time before Ukraine joins. Now they are saying, well,
the problem is that at those days, neither the Americans nor the German governments were keen on it. And now this is not something which is a point of discussion. They swapped roles. However, as far as the EU is concerned, we've got the support of 26 members, the member states, with the exception of Hungary, that Ukraine should join the EU. And this is the government who decides that matter, and not the president. So that is not quite relevant. However, the leader of my party, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Defense Władysław Kosiniak-Kamysz, said it very clearly. The past has to be accounted for. We lost up to 120,000, largely civilians, women and children as well.
In that Volhynia
massacre. And this has to be, the Ukrainians have to come clean on that. I mean,
so in a sense, Mr. Nawrocki is right there.
We, as a PSL, because the majority of people murdered in Volyn were peasants and very often members of my party. So yes, we are very much devoted to the memory of these people. And yes, this has to be sorted out. We cannot push it under the carpet. And thankfully, this government, our government, managed to achieve first exhumations of the bodies, because the only thing we want is to exhume the bodies and give them proper burial. We don't want anything else.
Well, but do you expect, like Mr. Nawrocki, some kind of a formal apology, at least from the Ukrainians, or some members of these nationalist militias, they are celebrated as heroes in Ukraine, and this is causing.
This is causing a problem because it's, of course, because the Ukrainians, and it's not for me to tell the Ukrainians what to do, but as a historian, I can say that they decided to celebrate the wrong heroes. They had fantastic heroic figures, and they decided to celebrate Bandera, who for them was a hero, but for quite a few others was not. And although he did not participate in the massacres himself, he was imprisoned imprisoned by the Germans at the time. But
he was the father figure for the.
He was the father figure for the movement. I think there should be a reconciliation, and it should be said at some stage by the Ukrainians, like the Germans came to see us. But it's not always. It doesn't always happen. I mean, it's quickly or never. If you look at the situation in Far East between Japan and Korea, it never happened.
Right.
Japan and China.
Okay, I have another question to you. You know, Mr. Nawrocki has pledged his loyalty to U.S. President Donald Trump, who got a picture of Mr. Nawrocki, took a picture together with Mr. Nawrocki in the White House, and congratulated Mr. Nawrocki on his election. And then we had this bizarre event just days before the election where a member of the Trump cabinet, Kirsty Noem, came to Poland. First met government officials because this was an official visit. And then straight from there, she went to a conference somewhere in southern Poland and endorsed the opposition candidate. And what's more, she called the government candidate a train wreck of a leader. And I'm a little surprised that there was absolutely no reaction from the Polish side to this.
Well, it was not an official position of the American government. Some members of the American government have very strong views. They not necessarily are fully aware of our political situation. We maintained strong links, transatlantic links with the Americans. We considered the USA as our strongest ally and and final security, military security for all Europeans. We are well regarded.
No, I understand all of that. I apologize for interrupting you, but don't you think it required some kind of a reaction? Because after all, it was meddling in an election.
It was criticized by some people in the United States. It is not our role, not a government's role, to react to every statement, every member. It is not. We maintain very good contacts with Secretary Rubio. We maintain very good contacts with Defense Secretary Hexet, whose first visit abroad was to Poland, and our Minister of Defense, within 3 months of seeing him here, went to see him in Washington. This is what
2 weeks ago.
Yes, that is what matters. We maintain the close links to people who are actually running the U.S. policy, and of course, we are close to President Trump, and it's we are the best ally, according to the Americans.
Yes, they keep saying this.
Because we spent $60 billion on American arms.
Well, hopefully it's more than just the money. But another question to you. How big is the risk that, let's say, the U.S. administration, Mr. Trump, will now try to talk to President Nawrocki only rather than the government when it comes to Ukraine or European security?
On European security, President Trump talks to the European members of NATO, because that's what matters. And in terms of Ukraine, the Americans are fully aware that the role of Polish president is not an executive one. I do not hear any American president calling a German president, for instance, although theoretically at the same level. No, they call the chancellor, whoever it is. And I think President Trump will have a good relationship with Chancellor Merz. So no, the Americans are in touch with the Polish government on these matters and will remain doing so, because they understand what the way our politics is arranged.
Right. So you mentioned Chancellor Merz. He's going to Washington this week. Tomorrow, I think he starts his trip. What is, from the Polish perspective, the kind of message that Mr. Merz should get across to Trump, and what are Poland's expectations in general when it comes to this visit?
Well, the main message, and we keep saying the same thing, Europe was at fault for decades by not spending money on its own defense, relying entirely on America. And that was already under President Clinton, President Bush, President Obama, President Biden, first President Trump. Now has changed. Now, and we are the leaders in this process, and we are acknowledged as a leader in this process. We spent 4.7% of our GDP on defense, and in real terms, because GDP depends on the country's economy, in real terms, we are fifth largest spender on defense in NATO, out of 32. So we've got the third largest army after US and Turkey, and we encourage all our friends and allies in NATO to do the same. So we talked to the Germans, and the Germans a year and a half ago said it's impossible for us to
But what would you like to see now out of Washington when Merz finishes his visit?
I think we are seeing we are going to have a NATO summit in The Hague, so that's various issues we discuss. I think it's fairly obvious that everybody in NATO is going to spend probably 3.5% on defense of the GDP. We are telling the Americans, yes, we are going to rearm, we are going to reindustrialize so we can produce arms ourselves. And we still want to maintain very close links with the states militarily because we still like the backstop to be in American hands. That is, there's still a nuclear umbrella, the satellite coverage and so on. We rely on the Americans, but as for the rest, we can take care of ourselves. If not yet, but fairly shortly, which leaves America, as President Trump wants, to have a free hand in Southeast Asia.
Right. Well, last time we spoke, we talked a lot about the Baltic Sea security. I remember you took deep interest in that, like probably everybody in Poland. So now we hear from our sources that a new agreement is going to be signed by Poland. Poland is going to join a format of Baltic and Nordic states. Can you tell us a little bit about what is it about?
Well, firstly, we are going to chair the Baltic States Council. Baltic States Countries Council as of I think 1st of July. We are working very closely with the group of Nordic and NBH, that is Nordic countries plus Baltic states, and we're becoming official member.
You will become.
Yes,
Poland will become
official member.
The number 9 member of this body.
And we already cooperate very closely with the Scandinavians. We have common interests and also defense security interests with Sweden and Norway and Finland, giving the shadow fleet and giving the attempts to end occurrences of cutting cables, underwater cables. We've just managed to stop cutting the electric cable between Sweden and Poland because we sent fighter jets to the ship, which was behaving suspiciously, and the ship departed quickly. The Swedes were doing the same thing. The Finns actually boarded the ship.
Yes,
and got it to.
That was a wake-up call for everybody.
Well, the Finns used the so-called border guards. They called it border guards, but it's more like a special forces unit.
Right.
And very efficient. So we are coordinated very closely on that.
In practical terms, the fact that Poland will join this grouping and become the 9th member, what does it translate into in practical terms?
In practical terms, we are coordinating all our activities in terms of surveillance, information exchanges, observation, monitoring, and reaction to potential threats, because we see that, including cyber threats, in which our military is very efficient. And we worked with the Baltic states, and we worked with the Finns, Swedes, and Norwegians and Danes on that, and Germans, to make the Baltic Sea secure, because we face a potential ecological catastrophe, because this shadow fleet, meaning tankers illegally moving Russian oil are in a very poor condition and without insurance. So if something happens, we can have a complete ecological disaster in the sea. And we are monitoring in all possible ways, with satellites, with planes, with ships, with submarines, observing. And the last event which happened, a French warship came here to help.
Right.
So we
and in terms
close.
of, again, this agreement, is it possible that, for example, this will provide for the integration of the Eastern Shield, which is a Polish project of guarding the eastern border, with the Baltic Shield, or whatever it is called?
We are already integrating the Baltic states and
But this
Finland.
agreement is going to speed it up, or?
No, I think this is going. There are various formats which are going in parallel.
And how about procurement, for example? Joint procurement, there's a lot of EU money now for defense. Is this agreement going to facilitate such?
That is done more at the EU level, but we also discuss it bilaterally, because we are doing something with the Slovaks, we are going to do something with the Swedes, we are doing something else with the Latvians. So it's a number of efforts. We still haven't got to the stage that we fully coordinated and purchases of the same type of material. So to give you an example, there are artillery shells, the basic artillery shells, 155 millimeters. That shell does not fit in every weapon artillery in NATO. So we have to, our budget, our defense budget in Europe is about a third of that of America, but we get about a tenth of what America gets, because they is unified and we are not. Right. But we are now moving very fast in this direction. We are discussing various models. It may be a model, each country produces one specific type of arms. For instance, the Germans, I don't know, tanks, and the French or the Swedes, fighter planes. Or we can do the Airbus model, that every country produces some part for the final product. Well, we'll see. This is being discussed, but the fact is that we have secured substantial funds on revamping the defense industry. 50% of what we spent on the military have to go to defense industry. Right. And 50% of that has to go to the Polish defense industry.
That's very convenient. Final question, because we're running out of time. Should Ukraine be invited to the NATO summit in June?
I think Ukraine should participate. Ukraine has a fantastic army, proved itself in battle. It's most experienced army now in Europe in terms of battle experience, and we can learn a lot, and NATO could learn a lot, but it's not up to me to give the invitation.
Minister Bartoszewski, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for watching. This was On the Record. See you next week.